All right, welcome to another totally rewarding chats. We're going to talk a little global mobility today with Morgan Crosby. How are you?
Pretty darn good, Sean, and yourself?
I'm good. And for those that are here, this is kind of surreal. I'm a boomerang at salary. Um, I first met Morgan in 2000 something. Um, and I was at Salary and we did a webinar together and you were at the same company. We won't talk about how many places I've been at the same company. And so this is like full circle moment coming back around.
It is. I'm actually surprised you invited me back, but I'm glad that you did.
Well, we were joking ahead of time that you had gotten, you said I was treating you very remedial. And then prepping for that call, I had been told you were like a genius, which has been confirmed over the years. And that, you were new. And then of course now you're like way better at it in general and were then. And so we're stoked to have you back on.
You're setting a high bar here. I feel like I can only go down from here, Sean, but
I
hopefully
I think
hopefully it'll go all right.
I think he's trying to submarine you right away here, right? So
Okay.
if he can make others look like they're not meeting expectations, it inflates his own sort of position.
Uh,
Paul only says that because I invited Paul to join me this year so that I had someone with just as low a bar. And so between the two of us, we know all guests will look good. That's the
that's
general,
really our goal, right?
that's really our goal.
is that kind of like smart lists for comp people or something?
Ooh, that is a brand aspiration right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so to start, I said you've been at Airing for a while. Can you give us, for those that don't know, give us your background, your bio, and a quick highlight of what Airing does as well?
Sure, I'll start with the second part. AirInc does global mobility consulting. So we help figure out how to compensate, reward people, set up their packages when they're moving overseas or domestically. So for those of you who don't know AirInc, that's who we are. And we're a boutique consultancy of about 100 professionals. And I've actually been at Airing for 28 years, which, yes, is a long time to be in one place. But it's also a testament to how nice of a place it is to work at Airing. It's a great organization. And I started Airing doing, I think, what's probably the coolest job in the world, which is going around the world to collect the cost of living in supermarkets, in department stores, like literally going to Kazakhstan to write down the price of a loaf of bread or interviewing a realtor about, how much does an apartment cost. So, at a very young age, I got to fly all over the world on the company dime, which was really great. And then from there, I went into, roles in client facing roles. I founded our consulting practice. I helped out with our growth strategy, and now I'm the chief strategy officer at Airing. So that's my bio.
So I have to step in here. So everything I know about global mobility comes from a gentleman named Frank Bodengraven, who was at Air Inc.
He
When I
was.
was at Morningstar, he was our consultant. And he first told me that there are people flying all over the world. And he may have even used similar, like looking at the price of a loaf of bread. I didn't believe him that those were real humans. I'm like, you were saying that. That can't possibly be true, but you were a human, like you were a real person doing the job that Frank said actually existed.
Absolutely. Yeah. So he wasn't pulling your hair there. It's
Yeah,
true.
Wow.
it is
Yeah.
harder, Paul. So I was at Air Inc., my longest job ever, actually. And one of the coolest things I did so you could understand the business was went out and did that. And two things, it is cool to go. It is way harder than you think. And then in just karma coming to get me, they sent you with this like binder to go fill out all this information. Back then, where I flew in the Caribbean, they took my binder. Um, and so I had to go, but it is legit. Like it's a legit 3 to 4 days going collecting thousands of stuff at multiple stores. And there's a map. Like it sounds like Morgan makes it sound like you just tool around. I go, out to eat 2 or 3 times, write some prices down and check out. It's a ton of freaking work.
Yeah, that's wild. I literally didn't believe it just from the standpoint of the scale of data collection and what that would imply, given the level of, and I'm sure we'll go there, the level of granularity that the problem lives at, right? It's not, I want to move to China. No, it's, I want to be in this neighborhood in this city, doing this thing. And that's just a lot of information. So I had a hard time fathoming the human scale necessary to do that.
That was a blast from the past too, with Frank Bodengrave reference. Um, so the speed round, Morgan, very important questions. Are you a coffee or tea person?
Coffee.
Um, Knowing where you had been, favorite location you have been to for surveys?
Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, that came quick,
Yeah.
actually. Okay. You had this is an I kind of know where this is going to go, but you have a weekend away all of a sudden. Do you want to go rough it in the woods or a posh weekend away?
Oh, totally posh weekend away. I just got back from the Cotswolds where I stayed at a very posh place indeed. So yes, I'm a posh girl.
Yeah. Paul. But we've been on a little run of people more of my speed in the woods. So Paul, I think the way he
We're back
quotes it
home.
is if he goes camping, it's at a Marriott.
That's
Uh,
right. Yeah, a low brand Marriott is roughing it for us. So
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. Marriott's a very good brand, but
love
yes,
them,
yes.
love them, absolutely. But some of them are rough, and I'm not afraid to worry about that.
which is ironic as we talk about pay bands overlapping at times, Paul. That's like the high end of my lodging
That's
band, and
right.
it's the low end of your band.
That's
Um,
right.
your favorite band?
Oh, God, that's a tough one. I'm gonna have to say Guns N' Roses.
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah. Appetite for Destruction
yeah.
area.
There was an era there where
Yeah,
that is worth more than others for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. The raw sounding Guns N' Roses. Yeah.
Totally.
And then the last one, hopefully not too hard. Are you a crunchy or creamy peanut butter person?
Ugh, do I have to decide? I'm just a peanut butter person.
Wow.
But
Okay.
but there can't be 2 jars in the pantry, right? Like, do you have both jars in the pantry?
I know, well, I kinda, like, buy one time and then another one the other time, but I guess if I had to choose, it would be creamy.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's the usual way I frame it is you have $3 and you go to the store. Although, can you buy peanut butter? I guess we could ask you where in the world you can buy peanut butter for $3,
Well,
$3 US.
see, the thing is, it's kind of an American thing. So if you go to a low cost place, it's not something that's low cost because it's imported. And that's, we're going to get into this part today because when you're compensating somebody who's used to buying, really good peanut butter and you send them to Kazakhstan where they don't eat peanut butter, I don't know if they do or if they don't. It's imported, so it's a lot more expensive, even though maybe locally produced goods are cheaper.
No, that's fair because I definitely am a 4 or 5 day a week peanut butter and jelly. Like I would
You
fall
would bring it.
100% in what Morgan's talking about. Like to eat like I normally eat to be somewhere, I would have to import that. So as we segue over, I think for the sake of everyone, and then we can dig in, give us just kind of an overview of a mobility program and the types of programs that a company might use to, you know, put somebody somewhere else.
Sure. So mobility is all about moving people either domestically or internationally. So their job is moving. And it could be for new hires or for existing employees. Increasingly, it could also mean that the functions working on remote work cases, especially if it crosses a jurisdiction, right? So, even if Sean, you go from Massachusetts to California to work remotely, there could be ramifications, right? So, when you cross jurisdictions, mobility often gets involved. Immigration only cases, mobility gets involved. So it's about the movement of people and kind of adjacent, considerations around that. And so because of that, there are different plans or policies associated with that. And I'm guessing that's what you meant when you asked about plans, right,
Man.
Sean?
Yep.
Um, and this is when it gets super fascinating because this is when the comp world intersects with mobility, which I think is the coolest part about mobility, to be honest, the compensation side. Uh, so you can have two types of mobility. You can have assignments, which are temporary, I'm going somewhere for a little while, but I'm expected to come back. Or you can have transfers when I'm sending you somewhere and you'll probably be there indefinitely or for a long period of time. And this has a big bearing on how you compensate people. Because if you're going temporarily on an assignment, I'm typically keeping you on your home rate of pay. But then I have to balance out that home rate of pay. The tax rates are different in the host location, peanut butter costs more or less. So you have to balance out that home salary. Whereas if I'm moving indefinitely somewhere, I don't really want to do that home based approach because it's super expensive. And over time, it just doesn't make sense to keep somebody anchored to their home comp plan. And so that's when you would transfer to the host location and host compensation. So those are the typical plans. I have more to say about them, but I'll pause there so I don't go running on. Do you have any
Yeah,
questions or
let me
comments?
let me ask a follow-up.
Sure.
So, again, everything I learned about mobility, I learned from Frank in 2012. The At that point, it felt like there was this interesting inflection happening in mobility where there was a desire to move away from these sort of balance sheet, kind of host-based approaches. Was that a flash in the pan? Has that come back? I guess, and talk about why was that? Like, what's created this tension around how you structure these things and how you would make those choices?
Yeah. So, ever since you first met with Frank until today, the home based balance sheet, that's that temporary assignment where you're paid on your home rate of pay, that keeps declining in use. And the reason is it costs a lot of money. Like it can cost 4 times the employee's salary, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. And so if somebody makes $200,000, all of a sudden they're costing you, $800,000. That's a huge cost to the company. So those are used sparingly, and when we absolutely need to do it and it makes sense to do it, right? We see this a lot still in the oil industry or manufacturing where I really do just need to send somebody over there to get the job done and bring them back. So it still has a place, but because of the cost, people prefer using a host-based assignment because or transfer because if I move you to the host location and I just pay you based on the cost of labor rate in that location, and I don't protect you against additional tax costs. I don't care if peanut butter costs more or less. I don't do any of that stuff. It's a lot less expensive. And part of the reason we can do that now is companies have gotten a lot better about talent planning. They used to say, "Hey, I'm going to send you abroad. I'm just going to, put you on a home-based package." But now they've said, "Hey, how long are you actually needed
Mhm.
there? I'd rather just pay you like a local if you're going to be there indefinitely."
Yeah, that's where the challenge hit me when I was in my Morningstar days was 3 years was a somewhat common assignment, which doesn't feel that temporary, and, life finds a way, and 3 years often, like, would manufacture itself into 5 years or 6 years or, "Wow, they're still over there." And there was this memory of, yeah, but it used to be, posh to be an expat, and now it didn't feel so posh, particularly since we were moving people to, I don't wanna call them low cost locations, but not American standard of living locations. So, you know, here I am sitting in a very, very large house by global standards. You're not gonna get that if you're moving to Hong Kong or if you're going somewhere else. So, like, we had a real tension point around it doesn't make sense to move you and have you live like royalty right next to our employees who live very differently. So
Yes.
it was a real difficult cultural tension, but we also wanted that person to go. Right? It was really important to the business to get that person that we really believe was the right person to lead or to build or whatever the thing was. So it was
I
really
think that
hard for us to
I think
navigate
that
that
gap
trade
is
off.
I think that gap, that trade-off gap has changed too, Paul, with the amount of talent that's out there. So oil and gas has a very particular skill set, and you're like, I just don't have anybody else but Morgan to go do this job. I'm kind of forced in that corner. I think if we're looking at a comp consultant and you're like, do I really need a comp consultant in this location? Can I do a remote? Can I hire someone local? Can I do whatever? You've got to validate that gap that's in between there. And so consultancies, like Air Inc. have come up, with these packages that allow you to kind of, you know, get the talent where you need, but the CFO is not going to freak completely out about why you need it. And I also think people want to go. I think that changed over time as the world got a little smaller. You're like, "Hey, Paul, for your career, I'm going to send you to the UK." And, that doesn't sound so bad to you. You're like, "Oh, I'll go." And to your point, you're not going to get wealthy doing it, Paul. It's for your career and other stuff, but you're not going to make a ton of money off it.
Yeah. And this is where I think comp professionals have some challenges, right? Because you think, oh, I've benchmarked all my salaries. I have a great global grading structures. I'm sending somebody from Singapore to Malaysia. I'll just pay them based on the cost of labor in Malaysia. What's the big deal, right? And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, the salaries in Malaysia are a lot less than in Singapore. The tax rates are higher. You're going to lose some of your ability to save or to spend when you do that, right? So as much as people want to use a host-based scheme, because it seems great for the company, it's not so great for the employee. And we call this affinity. There are just certain country combinations that have good affinity where the wages or the tax rates or whatever are similar. And then there's ones that just have terrible affinity. And so, Singapore to Malaysia is a classic one. US to anywhere pretty much is a classic one. The dollar is so strong now, it just, it's hard to send anybody anywhere. But that's when comp professionals really do need to pick up the phone and call mobility and say, am I going to have a problem when I try to move people between these locations? Because to Sean's point, you might have to do what's called a local plus package where you give them the local rate of pay, but you have to add a little bit of something on top of that. And so that's where you might not get a full blown expat package, but you might get, something in between.
Well, it's also super complicated, I think, in that local plus when you talk Morgan of how long do you move them to plus? How long do you take? Kind of the learn to live like a local. So even though you're like, Paul, we're going to move you to UK, which on, you know, at from the upside, from the top, it looks like that's not hard. Like, how hard would it be for you to live in London, Paul? Like, you speak the language ish, you're good. But actually, where do you live? How do I buy stuff? Do whatever. How do I live like a local? No car things, right? And so I think that's where it gets really complex. And then I think we're going to talk about the complexity that I think comp people aren't familiar with is the legal aspect, but the tax is crazy. It's a huge consideration. And you mentioned Americans, like you can't break tax residency here.
Yeah, that's the thing. You've got on the face of it, there's the difference in tax rates. So let's say in one country the tax rates at your salary level are 20%, and you're going someplace where it's 40%. We're going to Belgium. Ooh, high taxes, right? But then if you're American, you might have to still pay residual taxes in the US, right? Now, and it's super complicated. There's foreign tax credits, there's exclusions that can allow you to reduce your tax liability in the US, but not always, right? So, like, if I send you to the UAE and you don't pay any taxes, you don't have any of that, right? So that's where this concept of tax equalization comes into play, where you have the employee pay what their stay-at-home rate would be, and the company covers all of the tax costs, and that's what you get on a traditional balance sheet, and that's super expensive, right? So there's a lot of ways to mitigate that, but you're not getting over the fact that the tax rates are not the same everywhere in the world.
So with all that in mind, Maureen, like now we've basically said it's really complex. Um, and I know we've got, the global job grades and everything. How do you work with companies? You were just in particular, how do companies come up with a successful mobility program that aligns, not just picking the cheapest way or just moving everyone one way? How does that design happen? And then where do you see that overlapping with comp?
So, this is something that has to be very carefully determined, right? First of all, companies have to define what is their philosophy of how employees should be remunerated when they go on an assignment, and when is it okay to veer away from that. So some companies will pick a no loss, no gain philosophy, and then that means they have to use the balance sheet. Some of them will pick a philosophy that says everybody should just be able to live like a local when they go somewhere. So you have to start with that when you're deciding, how your compensation structure is going to work. And you have to decide, maybe some people get the full blown package and some people don't. And what are the rules around that? Usually it is if it's a temporary assignment or it's a high level executive that gets the full package. And so that's the compensation side of it. But there's the whole other aspect that we haven't really gotten to yet, which is, how do I relocate this person? How much assistance do I give them? Do I help them sell their home in their origin location? Do I ship all of their household goods? Do I ship their pets? Do I help with the spousal visas? Like, there's all of this ancillary stuff that you have to add to these packages. And generally speaking, companies these days will have several tiers. They'll have a top tier, a middle tier, and a bottom tier for addressing the cost or how much we want to invest. But there's a lot more to it than just how do I pay them.
Yeah. There's a philosophy is a strong word, but like there's an interesting parallel with the way that comp people think about comp, right? Which, cost of living is a word we throw around a lot in the comp world too. Like, hey, it's really expensive. I need to make more. And often our retort as compensation professionals is, look, you control how you live. Like, it's not my it's not my job to manage what house you live in, how many cars you drive, right? What food you eat, right? Not my business. I found in mobility, you kind of had to deal with that business, right? So if you're moving me with 2 kids, a car, a house in the suburbs, there's going to be different needs that if you're moving Sean, whose kids are off the payroll, right? Um, so you kind of had to get into their personal business, if you will. Like you had to have more familiar. I guess. How do you educate people on that? Like, is it wrong to worry about that? Is that just the deal with mobility? Is you have to personalize a bit more than we would ever really consider on the comp front alone.
I see Sean's,
Well, I was going to ask you to add to that because the part that's interesting there, Paul, is to have Morgan add to that. It's from a data standpoint, right? Because the gut reaction is I'll just go grab how much peanut butter costs here and how much peanut butter costs in Kazakhstan. Fine. Like that math isn't that hard, but when you answer the question like how you move people, you can do a better job, Morgan, talking about kind of the spendability patterns, like how you purchase, because it's not a one to one. You don't buy one car and one peanut butter every year, like you buy multiple things through the year. So I don't know if you can expand on that too, Morgan, because that helps lay the context for the complexity about moving people. And um, I you can use the example. I use Japan a lot because the Japan shopping basket is pretty easy to get your head around.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So we'll address the Japan thing. Like, if I go to Japan and I want to eat a steak and a baked potato with sour cream, it's going to cost a fortune. But if I go and I eat noodles in the noodle shop, it's like $2, right? Literally, even though Japan is very expensive. So philosophically speaking, we can say, I don't care if you want to eat steak. To your point, Paul, you're going to Japan and I expect you to eat the noodles, right? The locals eat it. That's fine. So it does matter sort of what your philosophy is on that, Sean. And I don't know if that's what you meant by Japan or not.
Well, I know that so on a Japanese outbound, right? They might have more rice that they, day in and day out eat, et cetera. And so, you have these different buckets of comparing, I was going to say apples to apples, but I guess maybe they buy different apples, but, rice to potatoes thing, more just highlighting the complexity
Yes.
around that.
Well, that's fascinating because it can mean that it's more expensive in Japan if you're coming from the US. So let's say Japan is 20% more expensive than the US, but you can also say that it's 30% more expensive in the US if you're Japanese, which the math, if you did that, wouldn't work.
Always more expensive. Just keep
Yeah.
moving back and forth, and all of a sudden, it really costs a fortune.
Well, and
Yeah.
the reason for that is because, you're consuming that market basket that's you're used to, right? Which might be wasabi and, you know, pickled ginger or whatever, which costs a lot more here than it does in Japan. So, it just depends on what you're looking at in that market basket. So it can be expensive in both directions. But if you go back to the education thing, like if I send you Paul on assignment to Kazakhstan, you're not going to be able to send your kids to the local school. I mean, you could, but that would be really
Not
difficult
gonna
for
go
them.
well.
It's not
Not
going to
gonna
go
go well.
well. So most companies have what they call a philosophy around duty of care. What's the right thing to do for my employees, right? And duty of care can mean things like, okay, they need international health insurance or they need a security briefing when they're going to a different country. But it can also mean, hey, you know what? It's not reasonable to expect that Paul's kids are going to go to the local school. I need to compensate him for that or pay for that. Now, you can do that by giving you a full blown expat package. You can do it by giving local plus. You can do it a variety of different ways, but those are the kinds of things that you just can't get away from when you're sending people to maybe more far flung places that are, don't have as big of an international community.
Sure. So it's that duty of care is a good word, actually. I think, Sean, we should jam on that a little bit more on the pure comp side too, because I think in many cases and I've said this myself as a reward leader, like it's not my job to care for you, domestic employee that I hired. Like I pay you a market competitive rate. You've got to make some choices. Um, Whereas it's a little bit different with mobility because you're asking people to move. If I just raise my hand in this sort of digital nomad day and say I want to go live in Kazakhstan, I imagine your answer is different than if the company is
Absolutely.
saying, "No, Paul, we need you to whatever start up a plant in Kazakhstan." Right? Is that part of the trade off too? Is like where did it come from? Whose idea was it?
Totally, totally. And, you know, a lot of companies now have what's called employee driven versus employer driven packages. And the first question that people ask is, well, who initiated this? And in some cases, that's clear cut, and we really know. And in other cases, the business will try to contort the answer to what they want. Sometimes the business wants to give the employee more. And so they say, oh, no, I asked them to go. And sometimes the employee is being, actually told they have to go, but the business will say that no, they raised their hand. So, yes, in theory, when people are not lying, yes, if you go to Kazakhstan because you raised your hand, you would get basically an immigration assistance to make sure you're legally able to reside there and work there, and maybe a tax briefing to make sure you file your taxes because it doesn't look good if you work for company ABC and you don't pay your income taxes. And that's it. That's all. We wouldn't pay for your flight. We wouldn't pay for anything if you raised your hand. But if you haven't raised your hand and it's critical that you go, you get a lot more, at least at minimum a relocation package.
I mean, the thing that I always found the parallel, Paul, is there's a pay philosophy, and in every company seems to have a pay philosophy, and they have it on paper and it's there, and then how quickly you deviate from the pay philosophy. It's almost like a race between mobility and comp, who's going to deviate from their pay philosophy the quickest based on that first exception. And I know in mobility, exceptions are like it's a whole exception handling process thing. Like that in mobility, literally just exceptions have a category.
It is a big thing in mobility, unfortunately. Although I will say that some of the packages, the policies that we were talking about, have been adapted to be more flexible to reflect that employees might have different needs. And so that's helped a little bit with that. And I know later you're probably going to ask me about technology. That's also helped with that. So I'll save a little bit of a comment about
You
that.
can go right now. We don't. There's not really. You know, you don't have to go item by item. Yeah. Paul will talk about technology
We
whenever.
always love to talk about tech because
Yeah.
I think it is like because I think the flexibility within a framework is always a good thing, right? Like, how do you put some control so you're not just like, like Sean, I'll give him, 50,000 more dollars, right? Like, how do you create some structure so that you're not all over the place? But, do I want to move my dogs? But Sean doesn't have dogs. And should he lose out on value essentially, or should I create more cost for the company? So I understand the need to be flexible. So I guess talk about how that has gotten easier because that was really hard. I remember personally having to approve, whether or not the dog could move. Can the car go with them? Because that's the way mobility was done in 2012. So I'd love to hear about how that's changed in the past times here.
Sure. I mean, in the past, we used to move, a 40-year-old white guy with two kids is what we used to do, right? Sorry to use a crude example, but that's the way it used to work. And
Just call him Paul. Just call him Paul.
yep,
It's fine.
new call. And the bias was in the policy that we were moving Paul, right? And you could, if you read a policy from 10 years ago, you could read that right there in the policy. It would be clear, right? And now companies have recognized that no, we're moving all different types of people that have all different types of needs. And so some of the ways that companies have managed this, some have gone to a cash lump sum, which is dreaded by many in the industry, but loved by some. And so a cash lump sum is a way to kind of help, hey, for those things that I don't want to get involved with your personal needs, here's some cash, go away and use this for that. Some do what's called like a managed relocation cap, where they total up what they're willing to spend on you, but say, hey, here's a whole menu of services, but pick the things that are meaningful to you. I still spend on you what I was going to spend on you, but you get to pick what you want. And some do this like point system where you get 100 points and you can spend, this many points on that. And the technology has started to come in so that you can log on as the employee and go on and pick these services. And in the past, that didn't exist. And there were pioneers in the industry that said, hey, I want this in my program. And then largely RMCs, which are relocation management companies, or in some cases, the assignment management software companies, they adapted their tools and their technology to be able to administer those programs. And it gives people more choice.
Yeah. That's where I feel like in my 3 corporate stops, I experimented with every single model possible, like thinking that I was innovative and just honestly, I probably just found all the downsides of all these different approaches. But I did kind of land on preferring like a hybrid, like here you're always going to need these things. You're always going to have to move some stuff, your house, right? That's sort of a given, right? And I don't want you to worry about the cost of that. But I'm not going to I'm going to give you a choice within a budget for all the other stuff that's not normal, right? If you have pets, if you have cars, if you have a boat, like it's not on me, that's on you to an extent. So here's 20 grand worth of moving costs and you can spend it how you want. Like, and that was not possible in 2011 because the programs weren't built that way, but it was possible by, 2020 when I sort of took my last bite at the apple, right? The technology thought that way. Like you tell me what's included, you tell me what's a flexible spend, but don't make the employee go figure out how to do it. Like use these vendors to make it easy and simple, within a relocation envelope. So I found that flexibility was super helpful and the tech made it possible, right? Where I could get good visibility to cost. The employee had one place to go to sort of get everything done, but I didn't have to talk to Sean about his boats. And, because it's like, I don't really care. But if you want to spend money on that, great, have
Yeah.
at it. Like you
Yeah.
can use your flexible allowance for that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's called a core flex program, and companies have really adapted to that. I'm not sure Sean has boats. He's got camping equipment and running
The
shoes,
camper,
right?
I should have brought up the
Yeah,
camper.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah. We have, yeah, it depends. Smaller boats. They're definitely not ship sized.
Yeah.
Lake.
Kayaks and canoes are easy compared
Yeah,
to,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
In fact,
Uh,
we know Sean might be cheap to relocate. Let's give him a lower cost package if we do move him.
Well, that
that
was
is,
that was part of the challenge, right? Like there were people who you knew were going to be a bit of a pain about moving, and there are others that were ready to live like a local, right? The citizens of the world that always adapted, and I just felt uncomfortable that you would accidentally take advantage of those that understood if I'm moving to Hong Kong, it's going to be a small apartment. Of course, I'm not going to have a car. You know, my kids will be okay. Right? Like there are people who thought that way. And then there were others that were like, no, you really need to make this worth my
and I
while.
think
Like I
that's where tech
expect
comes
this.
in very
Yeah.
much like I would liken it a little bit to comp planning, Paul, where you're like, I like him, I don't like him. He'll be okay because he's got other stuff going on. She's more money driven. Like you get into those thoughts, right? And the tech has allowed you to say, here's the core flex program for everybody moving to Hong Kong. It is what it is. Exceptions have to get called out. Like, here's the exceptions. Like before, it was like 5 pieces of paper coming up and it was a one off thing. And now I think the assignment management system, which is, as Morgan mentioned, basically where all the assignees go. So you can look at it even globally in other places and say, we can be consistent now based on these affinity matrices that, a company will put together and say, based on you going to these type of countries, this is what can happen. And so it's less likely to happen. I also liken it to comp planning because it's still going to happen, right? Like, hey, sure, we can give Sean a sheet of Visqueen and send him in the woods and he'll be fine for a year on assignment. And Paul is also going and we want Paul to go and that's not going to be okay. And so it's still going to happen, just like you're like with Merritt. Like Sean will be okay, but Paul, I don't want Paul to leave. Like it's still going to happen, but I think it closes the guardrails a little bit for companies, especially when they have a well-defined, policy put in place.
Yeah, don't try to do it without policies. Yeah, you need them in place.
Um, the only other thing I wanted to cover kind of before you get to the last question is I'm very curious what happens when colas go down. And I say that because I liken it to skills and cola based pay in the US, which I know also you guys deal with, but um what happens and how does that go over with companies, or what are the methods for them handling that? Because I think it's very applicable to companies that maybe pay by COLA in the US, right? Where the geo differential is different and all of a sudden it goes down. Do you actually lower pay? Because I don't see that very often. Like, or how do you see companies dealing with that in the mobility space when you're getting a cost of living adjustment and all of a sudden the numbers bear out that it's less this year?
Sure. So it's more likely that your COLA will go down if you're on an international assignment than in a domestic case, because an international COLA is measuring the cost of goods and services in a host country in one currency and comparing it to the costs at home in another currency, right? So in the Kazakhstan example, if I'm going from the US to Kazakhstan, I'm measuring the peanut butter in Kazakhstan tenge, and in the US, I'm measuring the cost in dollars, right? So what happens is the dollar often will gain strength against the Kazakhstan tenge, right? The dollar is strong. It once buys, 100 tenge, now it buys 120 tenge. So when the dollar is stronger, I need less dollars to buy tenge, and therefore I'm going to reduce your cola because it's going to cost you less to buy the peanut butter. Now, the problem with that is nobody likes it when a COLA goes down, right? And the COLA is the extra amount we pay on top of the salary to cover the cost of extra peanut butter or anything else. So they don't like it when that happens. However, if you're really good about getting ahead of these changes and you're really good about explaining why, then it can go a lot smoother. So first of all, pre-notify the employee, hey, your COLA update's coming in a few months. You might see an update or, an increase or decrease. And then if it goes down, clearly explain to them, hey, it's because the exchange rate, the dollar gained strength, and you just need less dollars to buy the same amount of tenge. It doesn't mean I cut your pay. It just means I rebalanced it. So it's all on the communications, just like with anything in HR, right?
Can we go? Paul and I are like every call, every episode we come back to. If you're in comp or mobile, anywhere in total rewards, basically communications is part of your job now. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I also, those who watch the video are going to see a look in my face. So I consider myself a pretty globally savvy person. I've traveled a lot. I know where Kazakhstan is on a map, although I think we're personally probably responsible for dozens of Google searches during this where people are like,
Yeah.
where is that? Never in a million years would I have known the currency of Kazakhstan the way that you just like rattled that baby off. I was holy smokes.
I might
Like that
actually have
is
some in the house here too, which is a scary thought. But yeah, there might be some lying around. We should have played the rapid fire game with currencies of different countries.
I'm pretty good at that, but I would not have gotten Kazakhstan. Like
That's
that is not one that I was
well,
high
Paul. We're gonna
on.
have to add that to the game. The trivia
Most
game.
obscure. Oh, yes.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
because for those, you need to keep it in your back pocket for when someone's like, "We're getting all the answers," and then you can just add one more bonus question. Um, yeah,
Well, that's a
that's there.
great game idea. Thank you, Morgan, for bringing it, for sort of spurring that in Sean's brain. I'm big on sort of compensation themed games, and a currency play could be in our future here. I like that a
Right.
lot.
All right. Well, the
Um,
currencies where you have a lot of extra zeros that you have to add to salaries that look like super long, I don't like those currencies, but yeah.
It's at
Korean
my
won.
favorite place. I loved going. I mean, when I went to Japan, I'm like, I need some cash. I'm like, look how rich I am. I'm gonna take out, this many thousand.
Yeah.
You're like, and go buy one Coke. But like, but for the moment, I was like, look at me hitting zeros. I'm
Yeah.
like hitting zeros.
I I had a bad habit when I was younger. I would go to an ATM locally, just put my card in and take a picture of my balance because it would do like a balance check just to see all the zeros. And I would be like, look at that bank account balance, right?
Yeah, hitting zeros.
It's the same amount of money as I have at home. But boy, I felt rich that day
Oh,
when you
I
look at it in
cleared my bank
Korea.
account balance in Indonesia once. I was like, I'm a gillionaire. This is
That's
amazing. I love
right.
it.
I don't
Yes.
even know how to say the number, right? There's
Oh,
that many zeros after
it's
it,
yes,
but
exactly. But I have that much money in
Yeah.
rupiah.
Any other like mobility things that we missed? Because obviously you're the expert. Like either landmines people should stay away from, or one or two key items that they should make sure they do. Like anything we missed.
Well, I mean, first of all, you really need to plan properly. If you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of surprises and not in a good way. So, for example, we've all heard stories in mobility of an executive who gets on a plane, flies somewhere, gets to the border, and is denied entry because they don't have the right visa or paperwork, right? So, we have to plan properly. Another good example is you say, oh, um, Susie's asking to work remotely from Spain and she can do her job from there. We just, grant her the ability to do that because no big deal. She can work from home. Now she can do it in Spain. Well, now we create some kind of corporate tax presence. The whole organization is taxable in Spain. So I think the thing is, if you're a comp professional and you've never done mobility before, call the mobility department because there's all of these things that can go wrong if you don't think about these items because there's a lot of compliance aspects to mobility and that's a huge watch out. So I would say don't go it alone. Make sure you bring in the mobility function to help you if you're in the comp department and you have
If you
mobility.
don't have a mobility department, there are organizations, Aaron being one, like make the call. It's worth the money. And jokingly, but not joking, I would say nobody wants extra accountants or attorneys in their lives, and that's who's going to show up. Like first and foremost, it's tax liability, it's it's legal visa issues, it's stuff like and none of those are friendly people that you want. That's not the line of people you want outside your door. So it's well worth the time, for people that are listening that don't have a mobility department to be like, call before Sean's like, I just want to go hang out in Italy. I can work remote. I'm willing to do the hours and be in Italy for, this amount of time. And there's no nomad thing going on. And all of a sudden you're getting a note about, filing
Yeah.
taxes and everything.
Well, and if I when I met Air Inc., it was because we didn't have a mobility department. We had an immigration department, and I think we conflated the 2. And as a result, our experts around mobility were the immigration attorneys. So they would tell us, like, we never had a compliance issue, but we had all sorts of problems with what's right? That, duty of care or just unintentionally being unfair locally, where now we are creating sort of kings and queens when we move people into a country and they're living posh, like beyond the Marriott, like living posh locally compared to the local team. And, particularly in this day and age where the fairness of pay within a country is in some cases being published. Think about the UK report, like it is pretty darn obvious if you've got somebody making an outlier amount of money if they're of a certain gender. So it just matters more, I think. So the expert isn't your lawyer who's going to tell you how to not get stopped at the border. There's a different expertise around how do you navigate sort of these comparisons, this cost experience, the employee's sort of value experience. That's not a law question. Like that's
Yeah,
more of
just say,
a
I mean,
different
simply for
question.
me, Paul, it's the kick-ass global, grading and leveling system is a good start, but it is not enough, at all.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Um, so Morgan, we always end maybe mobility, maybe not. If you could auto magically, it's a highly technical term, gonna throw at you, solve anything in HR, what would it be?
I really want a chat GPT for HR where I can just be like, I'm going to the dentist tomorrow. Is this covered or not? And I don't have to like look on SharePoint for the dental plan and all of that. Like, I want something where everything is there and I can just chat with it because that's the experience that I have now in my life with how I get information. And I think HR professionals are going to have to say, how do I create that sort of almost consumer grade experience? Because that's how people consume data and information now. And, people are working on it, but right now it's probably not as good as what you would get, obviously, with Chat GPT. So that's what I would want to wave my magic wand and get, Sean. So make it happen.
That's a super cool. I mean, super cool for me from the standpoint that it's conversational, et cetera. But also, if you have your own version of that Chat GPT, you can dump all your information in there because if you don't do it that way, then someone's going to go ask Chat GPT or Claude or Gemini, and that is not the answer you want them finding. So I think it's from both sides of it. I think it's a great one.
Yeah, I think people are working on it, Morgan. It's a question
Sure
of
they are.
when will it be there and how general is it? Because it really is an employee or I'm sorry, an employer level answer, right? You can't make a general one. It needs to be sort of employer specific, which makes it a little harder to scale. But yeah,
Yes.
I'll
It'll
push a
be
little,
there. I
Paul.
just want it
The
now.
local laws, and what you can report on your taxes. This is where I think it's going to be interesting
sure.
because you don't. Are you going to allow it to call outside the wall to basically get it? There's the inside stuff, and this is where I think it's coming to be really cool. Like, hey, what can I take on my taxes versus what can I put in my HSA, and how's that all carry? That changes. That's legislative. But it's super cool. Like, I think that's a super cool one. Well, as we wrap up, thanks, Morgan. Air Inc. and Morgan Crosby, you can find her on LinkedIn. Obviously, she will jam on this, and she has, since she started working as a sixth grader at Air Inc. with her 28 years of experience.
But
Uh,
still jet setting to Kazakhstan to look at the price of bread.
yeah, it's questionable parenting as I put that together, Paul, but she's back, so it worked out okay, and brought money back, so she didn't overspend. She has the money, so that's good. I really appreciate it, Morgan. I think this is great for everyone. And if people have questions, they can reach out.
Absolutely. It was a lot of fun. You guys are great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan.